Hi everybody, welcome to Beginning Calligraphy. I am so thrilled to share this calligraphic journey with you. The first 3 videos in our series, we're talking all about our tools. So that includes our pens or pen holders, our nib, our ink, and our paper. And really when you break down what you need for calligraphy, it's just that simple. Now, as a beginner, I want you to understand you don't need to go out and purchase anything super elaborate or expensive. I know these tools can feel overwhelming at first, and my goal with this video series is to make sure you understand your tools, how they work, and what tools are right for you, so that when you do go and buy your tools, you know exactly what to purchase and where. Now, if you're ready, let's get started. So let's talk first about our nibs. Now you might be wondering to yourself, what exactly is a nib? Well, a nib is the pointed part of a pen which distributes ink onto the writing surface. Even more simply, it's how you get ink from the inkwell or jar onto the paper. Nibs began to be mass manufactured in the early 1800s to replace feathered quills. This was a huge breakthrough for the invention of more ornamental styles of calligraphy, because no longer were penmen reliant on having a sharpened quill to help them with writing. Which leads me to introducing our pointed pen nib. And you can tell it's a pointed pen nib clearly by its shape. It's very pointed at the top, as you can see. Now, the pointed pen nib is the one we're going to be focusing on most in this video series. But I did want to introduce to you another popular type of nib, which is called a broad edge nib. And you can clearly tell the difference between a broad edge nib because it's flat cut at the top. Now, broad edge nibs, unlike pointed pen nibs, come in a variety of widths, and that's just depending on the type of style of calligraphy you want to be achieving. Most of the calligraphic styles from antiquity can be achieved by using a flat cut or broad edge nib. I believe that in order to understand a nib better, we need to understand the anatomy of a nib and how it works first. So let's examine our pointed pen nib. Starting from the top, we have our tip or our point. Coming around the side is our shoulder, down through the body, and then at the bottom is our base. Now, this hole in the middle is called a vent hole or breather hole. I've also heard it called a reservoir. And it leads down through the slit to open up the 2 sides of our point, which are called the tines. Now, the tines separate in order to have more ink flow off the nib. So when your tines are together, you're going to get a thin line or what we call a hairline. And if it's separated, you're going to get more ink or what we call a swell. Most calligraphy forms using a pointed pen nib are achieved through the varying degrees of pressure you put on your pen, opening the tines a certain amount. Now, you don't want to overextend the tines because then it'll create a misalignment and you won't get as clean of a hairline. So what type of pointed pen nib is right for you? Well, for beginners, I always recommend a Nico G. Nico G or a Zebra G are some of my favorite pointed pen nibs. I use them all the time in my own work, and they're great for beginners because they're very stiff. They're not as flexible. So when you're experimenting with pressure on your nib, this is a great nib to start out with because it won't kind of bounce back. It's not as springy. Now, I always recommend everybody try to experiment with as many things as possible because I believe that is the best way we end up learning. Nibs themselves are fairly inexpensive, so please try out some different types of nibs, and here are a couple recommendations that I also enjoy using. The first one that I recommend for people who are a little bit more advanced is a Hunt 101 or a 22B. They're extra fine hairlines and super flexible. The next one is affectionately called a Blue Pumpkin, or you can find it as a Browse 361 Steno. It's a great nib if you're looking for something that has a little bit more spring than a Nico G, but still stiff enough that you won't get too overwhelmed. Now, if you want to try your hand at some broad edge nibs, I'm a huge fan of tape broad edge nibs. They are really fantastic, super stiff, come in a variety of sizes. I should also note that broad edge nibs also come in left-handed sizes. So that's great for our lefties. Now that we know more about our nibs, what are we going to put them in to use to write? Well, that's where our pen holders come in. And these are the 2 different types of pen holders you're going to be looking to purchase. The first is a straight pen. And as you can see by its form, a straight pen is, no pun intended, very straightforward. Now, the great thing about having a straight pen is that it can be used with both broad edge and pointed pen nibs. So you can do multiple styles of calligraphy with just this one pen, depending on the type of nib that you have inserted into it. Our next pen is called an oblique pen or an oblique holder, and it's different from our straight pen purely because of this metal part that hangs off the side, and that is called the flange. The oblique pen was invented around the mid-1800s in order to help penmen create more of an angle for more ornamental styles that were becoming very popularized during that time period. So this is a great pen holder to use with your pointed pen and for pointed pen work only. Now, both pens are really great to purchase on their own, but Yoke Pen Company created a wonderful invention called the Deuce. And what's really great about it is that it doubles both as an oblique holder and a straight pen. So you get two pens for the price of one. And what's even better, it's great for lefties who want to try an oblique pen because you can put the flange on the right-hand side. And if you're right-handed, the flange will go on the left-hand side. Prefabricated oblique holders typically have the flange on the left-hand side, so this is a great option for lefties. Now that we know more about our nibs and our pens, how do we combine them? With an oblique holder and a pointed pen nib, you're going to insert it in between the small gap in the flange. Now, your nib should be able to sit securely and not be loose like this, because obviously if you go to dip it into your inkwell, it'll fall out. The reason why your nib might be loose inside your flange is because the curvature of your nib does not match the curvature of the flange. Now, most flanges will fit the most popular type of nibs, including a Nico G. And as you can see, it fits very securely and snugly. It's not going to move around. The base of your nib should just be peeking out beyond the flange, and there should be plenty of space to be able to dip your pen into your ink without it touching the flange. Now remember, both the flange and your nib are made out of metal, so if it comes into contact too often with a liquid like ink, it can start to rust. Inserting a broad edge or pointed pen nib into your straight pen is a little less complicated, as you slide the nib in between the outer rim and the inner teeth at the hole at the top. And now that we have our pens officially assembled with nibs securely in place, we can move on to our other tools.